You know, all three of today's sessions will be available on the AIS Highlights report on ncci.com later this afternoon, along with additional content that we've created as part of our AIS virtual program. On our website, you'll find a new research update from Raji Chaudhuravian on the next generation of medicine, as well as an update from Barry Lipton taking a look at current trends in workforce demographics. In the coming weeks, there will also be another session available from Barry on the efficacy of medical provider networks on work comp costs. I encourage you to take a look at all of this content as it complements today's core program. Right now, though, we've pulled together a great panel to discuss questions related to today's presentations. If you'd like to forward a question, please email AIS_virtual@ncci.com and we'll follow up with you directly. Joining me for our virtual Meet the Experts discussion are Donna Glenn, fresh off of her first State of the Line presentation, along with two of our practice leaders and senior actuaries, Jay Rosen and Sean Cooper. So let's jump right in. Donna, I'm going to ask you a question that I came up with first before we get into the other ones, because you just finished getting off of your first State of the Line presentation. We obviously did it virtually this year. What are any thoughts or takeaways from the experience?
Whew. Mark, I have to say it's been a great experience. I've been at NCCI for about 100 days now, and I've had the privilege of working with so many great people throughout the entire organization. My own team has so many different teams within the team working on this effort. So a huge benefit has been I get to know everybody through this process. And I've also seen how NCCI puts on an event and the production of the event and all of those people that are involved in that. So that too has been really a lot of fun. On a personal note, I wish I could say, now that it's over, I'm going to Disney World. If we were in Orlando, that was my plan. But there's no Disney in my near-term plans. I'm looking forward, though, to enjoying some Florida sunshine.
Thank you, Donna. Where is NCCI in the process of evaluating this year's rate filing season in recognition of COVID-19?
Mark, this is a common question, and the quick answer is we're evaluating options at this time. The challenge we have is that rate making is prospective in nature. So loss costs for 2021 must anticipate the risks faced by employers next January and beyond. And the lack of clarity surrounding COVID-19 compounds the difficulty for this year's rate-making season. Will COVID-19 persist into 2021? Will there be another wave of the infection? How will compensability actions differ by state and among various occupational groups? And the emergency orders are temporary. How should that affect prospective costs? So these are just a few of the many questions we need to consider. I'd say we have our work cut out for us.
So here's our next question. A couple of jurisdictions have provided estimated workers' compensation system cost impacts relative to COVID-19. Will you please describe what NCCI has done in this area? Sean, this may be a good one for you to take.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'll handle that one. So when we look across states, we see lots of legislation, executive orders, and emergency rules dealing with work comp benefits for COVID-19. All of them deal with COVID-19, but all of these state actions have been very different. We knew we needed a consistent approach to inform our stakeholders as well as promote constructive dialogue, so our response was a white paper called COVID-19 and Workers' Compensation, Modeling Potential Impacts. This white paper does three things. It provides a framework for evaluating the impact in various states, presents a qualitative discussion concerning the challenges in estimating key assumptions like the infection rate, the report rate, and the compensability rate. And the third thing it does is it outlines the potential impact of variables not contemplated in the model, things like permanent disability benefits and mental injuries. In the white paper, we included 4 different hypothetical scenarios that show specific applications of the model. We're using the same model here at NCCI to evaluate legislation, but we modify its application based on the specifics of the bill or the order that we're analyzing. But I want to point out that this model, it's not just for NCCI. This is a model that our stakeholders can also use. You can make your own assumptions for various parameters and then calculate the impact of your own scenarios. We realize the model is pretty sophisticated, and it's also inefficient for each of our stakeholders to build their own Excel spreadsheet. So with that in mind, we created a user-friendly tool that allows stakeholders to modify key parameters and see their estimates updated in real time. The first step when using the tool is to specify the jurisdiction and the workforce. For jurisdiction, we've included a drop-down for either all NCCI states or any of the individual states where NCCI provides rate-making services. And then for the workforce, we provided 3 options: either all workers, first responders, or healthcare workers. So when you make these 2 selections, the jurisdiction and the workforce, by doing that, you define the scope of your calculation. And once that's done, you simply use slider buttons to select your own assumptions, and then the estimated impacts are updated automatically. I want to mention that the tool follows the framework outlined in our white paper very closely. Because of that, it produces estimates of indemnity and medical losses only. We did not include estimates for LAE or any other expenses. And since we used worker counts from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the resulting dollar impacts represent costs for the total working population. So these are not just the costs that's covered through private work comp insurance.
Thank you, Sean. So here's our next question. In the past, maps of the United States were provided that showed changes in frequency and severity by individual state. Are these available to share?
Yep, I can take that one, Mark. And if I could use a couple of the charts in our State of the Line Guide addendum, that would be good. I'd like to start with the one based on frequency. All right, this first chart shows the average annual changes in lost time claim frequency for the NCCI jurisdictions over the 5-year period 2014 to 2018. Shades of orange represent decreases and shades of blue represent increases. And the first thing you probably see is that every NCCI jurisdiction is in some shade of orange. In fact, the overall countrywide change across the NCCI jurisdictions was a decrease of 4.6% over this 5-year period. Now if we can move to indemnity lost time claim severity. So this chart shows the average annual change in lost time claim severity. And as you can see, most all of the jurisdictions here are in some shade of blue representing an increase. In fact, the countrywide change across the NCCI jurisdictions was an increase of 2.5% per year. Some of the states that you may notice, for example, Alaska there in orange, can be explained by large claim activity that occurred relatively earlier in the 5-year period. So starting from that higher point, it looked like indemnity claim severity decreased over the 5-year period. Some of the states that are in darker shades of blue can be explained by large loss activity at the end of the 5-year period, or court decisions, or legislative changes that increased indemnity benefits on behalf of the injured worker, like what happened in Indiana. The last chart is medical lost time claim severity. And as you can see, shouldn't be a surprise, most jurisdictions are once again in some shade of blue. The average countrywide change was plus 2.9% per year. And in fact, on this chart, all of the states that are in some shade of orange, the darker shades of orange and the darker shades of blue, can be explained by large claim activity that either occurred at the beginning of the 5-year period or toward the end. And while I have your attention, if you're especially interested in this type of analysis, I would recommend that you navigate to ncci.com and look at our frequency and severity by state publication. Newly added this year is interactivity. So there's hovering and there's sorting, but what may be of special interest is the ability for the user to define a set of regional states. So for example, if you're interested in seeing how your target state compares to a regional average, for example, made up of the surrounding states, you can define your region as those surrounding states. And then you can compare your target state's information with the regional average and countrywide average. And you can even do so by individual year rather than looking at a 5-year average, as I've been discussing on these previous charts.
Thank you, Jay. Actually, I think this is another one for you, Jay. Is there additional detail available with respect to the relative changes in severity versus wage growth and/or medical care prices?
Yep, there certainly is, Mark, and thank you for that. You may recall in Donna's presentation on one of her charts, she compared the growth in indemnity severity with the growth in workers' wages. And on a separate chart, she compared the growth in medical loss time claim severity with the change in medical care prices. And on those charts, she did so over a 20 or so year time period. Now what I've done, and there are two charts in our State of the Line Guide addendum, if you can pull up the indemnity one, that would be good. This first chart, here's the indemnity severity versus wage inflation chart, and I've taken that 20-year time period that Donna used, as I mentioned, and split it into two smaller time periods. The time period on the left, you can see, runs from 1999 through 2008, and the period on the right from 2008 through 2019. So let's start on the left. The blue line represents the increase over time in indemnity claim severity, and you can see how it grew 1.9 percentage points more quickly than the increase in wages shown in the yellow line. Now contrast that to what we see on the right side of this chart, where we see wages in yellow grew more rapidly than indemnity claim severity in blue. Now why might that be the case? Well, you may recall coming out of the Great Recession in 2009 and 2010, as the economy was getting progressively stronger, we saw an influx of small, relatively less costly claims. And when that happened, that put downward pressure on indemnity claim severity. So you can see on the right side of this chart that between 2009 and 2010, there was a dip in the blue line before it started increasing. And if you shift your eyes over to 2016 and forward, you can see that indemnity claim severity in blue has pretty much tracked the increase in wage inflation in yellow. So this chart shows the growth in medical loss time claim severity in blue versus the increase in medical care prices in yellow. Let's once again start on the left-hand side of this chart. As I mentioned, blue is medical loss time claim severity, and you can see that that grew about 3.9 percentage points more quickly than the underlying growth in medical care prices. Now, medical severity in general, and the change over time in medical severity, is comprised of two individual components. The first is the growth in medical care prices, as we show on this chart. The second component is the change in utilization of medical services over time, or change in the quantity of or mix of these services. And the spread on the left-hand side between the blue line and the yellow line represents the impact that changing utilization has had or did have over that earlier time period. Now, if we compare that to what we're seeing on the right-hand side, we can see that utilization has had a much smaller impact over the last 10 or 12 years because medical loss time claim severity has essentially tracked with medical care prices.
Here's our next question. In the past, the State of the Line has included updates on its research agenda. Please provide a brief update in this area. Sean, this may be a good one for you to take again.
Yeah, that's a good one for me to answer, Mark. NCCI produces and publishes many research studies each year. Some of these are long-term studies that eventually lead to new and innovative methods that get used in our overall rate making, class rate making, or experience rating, for example. And then others are more short-term topical studies. I have a slide with a few of these if we can pull that up. Thanks. Some of these were released earlier this year, such as Breaking New Ground. Actually, that one was released late last year, but it's a topical study that provides information and insight into autonomous vehicles, which was one of 4 topics that Raji Chattaravian and I discussed at our Game Changers presentation during AIS 2019. Rate making in today's atypical work comp environment was published in January. And that was what's interesting because it discussed unique characteristics of the work comp market at that particular time. In terms of underwriting cycles, our market was in kind of what you'd call a hybrid mode, displaying both soft market traits like price decreases and stiff competition, as well as hard market traits like improved combined ratios and reserve strengthening. And the market has become even more atypical due to COVID-19, of course. Large losses in work comp is another topical study that isolated claims over $1 million in size and analyzed trends over the last decade. Some key findings from that study were those claims over $1 million represent less than 0.2% of claim counts, but they represent 10% of lost dollars. Another one is that half of these claims are caused by motor vehicle accidents and slip and fall incidents. So just those two causes of loss represent half of those claims. And in recent years, work comp insurers have more quickly determined the claims that are likely to exceed $1 million in size. Now, the study provides insight into the frequency of these claims from many different lenses. By time frame is one example, looking at the frequency of those claims before, during, and after the Great Recession. By industry group, there's a comparison in there between construction and total employment, and then also by body part. The use of networks to care for injured workers was one of our more in-depth studies. Some of the key findings there was, one, the use of medical provider networks has steadily increased since 2011. Medical provider networks are less prevalent in states where the work comp statutes specify that the employee has choice of physician over the employer's choice. And in all states studied, we found that in-network doctors were reimbursed at a discount from the fee schedule amounts. And the higher the fee schedule, the greater the discount. Barry Lipton's AIS 2019 presentation included preliminary findings from a couple different research studies. One of those was comparing physician services in work comp and group health. This study noted, number one, that work comp pays more than group health to treat comparable injuries. Number two, the higher quantity of services in work comp explains 80% of that difference. And number three, the extent of the quantity differences varies primarily by the type of injury. Barry also shared some of the highlights of our research published in our Experience Rating Plan update during that AIS 2019 presentation. Now, our Experience Rating Plan research is ongoing into 2021, so we'll have more to share on that next year. Several of these studies made extensive use of NCCI's medical data call. The medical data call has been in existence for about a decade now, and it was a significant investment, not just for NCCI, but also our affiliates. I'm happy to say that those efforts have really paid off, as the medical data call has paved the way, not just for improved analysis of medical fee schedule changes, but also for more groundbreaking research.
Thank you, Sean. Here's another question. This is the first year NCCI has started collecting indemnity data through the new indemnity data stream. How will that impact future research and legislative pricings?
That's a good question, Mark. I just talked about the medical data call. So our first quarter of indemnity data will be collected really soon. To be more specific, we're collecting indemnity data call data for any claim that has an indemnity transaction during second quarter 2020, and that data is due to NCCI by the end of third quarter 2020. The primary reason we created this call was to price legislation. However, there's lots of potential for research using this rich data source. Duration studies are always of interest to our stakeholders, as claim duration has a direct impact on costs. NCCI has conducted duration studies before, but there were limitations in the available data. Detailed Claim Information, or DCI, was a primary data source for previous studies, but due to the sampling process, the volume of data was limited. On the other hand, the indemnity data call will collect data on every indemnity transaction, so the volume of data and the information in the data will be much greater than DCI offered. Studies of duration may also be helpful in evaluating legislation. One example that comes to mind is legislation that addresses choice of physician. On the surface, one might consider the impact on medical costs, but if employer choice leads to better outcomes, the duration of indemnity benefits might become shorter. Now, if the indemnity call improves our ability to measure things like duration changes in various scenarios, the resulting research could prove useful for evaluating various types of legislative changes. Another topic of interest in recent years has been prescription drug use in workers' comp, particularly opioids. The medical data call has allowed us to measure the extent to which opioid use has declined in work comp in recent years. Many experts believe that declining opioid use translates into shorter claim durations. Now, NCCI will be able to link the data in our medical call with the data in our new indemnity call using key fields. And to the extent that opioid usage continues to decline in coming years, this linked data could provide opportunities for us to directly measure the impact of declining opioid use on claim duration. Another very timely research topic might be the impact of COVID-19 on time to first treatment. Now, telemedicine has been used a lot more extensively since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, but it's widely known that some of the less urgent medical treatment has been delayed. The indemnity data call may provide an opportunity for NCCI to measure the extent and the impact of those delays.
Okay, our next one asks, Donna mentioned the impact of carrier discounting during her presentation. Is there more information that can be shared in that area, such as the components of the measure? Jay?
Yep, thank you, Mark. I'd like to use a couple more charts from our state-of-the-line guide addendum, if I could, in this response. Thank you for pulling that one up. This chart shows the impact of discounting on workers' compensation premium over the last 20 or so years. And when I say impact of discounting, I'm talking about the combined impact of 3 individual programs: rate loss cost departures, schedule rating, and dividends. And as you can see in 2019, showed in blue, the combined impact of these 3 programs have served to increase work comp premium about 1.9%. In fact, over the last 6 or 7 years, you can see that the impact in combination from these 3 programs has been quite small. Now, to drill down into this 1.9%, we can look at this next chart. This shows by individual component with dividends at the top in yellow, schedule rating in the middle in purple, and rate and loss cost departures in the bottom in green. Let's start at the top with dividends. Not much of a major player in terms of impacting work comp premium, especially since most of the jurisdictions across the country at this point are on a loss cost basis as opposed to a full rate basis. What I find interesting about this chart is the offsetting that goes on between schedule rating in the middle and its downward pressure on work comp premium, and the rate and loss cost departures at the bottom and its upward pressure. In fact, every year since 2002, there has been some degree of offsetting between schedule rating and rate and loss cost departures. If you look at the values or the bars all the way on the right in 2019 and roll those up, that's how you can get the 1.9% figure I mentioned on the previous chart.
Thank you for that. Our next question says, what was the primary driver of the change in the overall workers' compensation industry loss reserve position as of year-end 2019?
I can take that one, Mark. This chart shows that as of year-end 2019, the industry reserve position was a $10 billion redundancy. That marks a $5 billion change from the prior year-end. Of that $5 billion change, $4 billion is associated with accident year 2019 that was newly added to the analysis this year. And in fact, what we have seen over the past couple of years is that the new accident year that's added to the analysis is associated with a large estimated redundancy. And it's only over time that this redundancy tends to diminish.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing at least one more question on COVID-19. This question is related to the last question, really, and asks, how do you think COVID-19 may impact the overall workers' compensation loss reserve position? And Jay, maybe that's for you again.
That's a really great question, and you may recall from Donna's presentation that she identified several factors that could put upward pressure on claim frequency and severity, and identified several factors that could put downward pressure on claim frequency and severity. Now, to the extent COVID-19 results in adverse loss development and increasing loss and LAE ratios, it's plausible to believe that the industry reserve position could deteriorate. On the other hand, if things turn out more favorably, then it's plausible to believe that the industry loss reserve position could be less impacted. Now, I should mention, during this year's analysis, we ran several scenarios under different expectations as to the extent that we would see adverse loss development due to COVID-19. And only after analyzing the results of those scenarios did we finalize our year-end 2019 estimate.
And our last question, Don, I'll come back to you. In addition to the white paper that helps to model potential impacts to workers' compensation, and that was released about 2 weeks ago, what has NCCI done to provide guidance to the industry related to COVID-19?
The COVID-19 Resource Center is the place to go for COVID-related thought leadership from NCCI. We wanted to make the information you need easy to find and encourage you to come back for updates. It's organized into sections that are very intuitive. The first one's frequently asked questions, and we update this weekly with new questions and answers, as well as including additional information on previously posted questions. Another section provides detailed information on regulatory, legislative, and legal activities, and this too is a dynamic area that's updated regularly. We also include NCCI announcements about filings and circulars, and those are all connected to COVID-19. The remainder of the Resource Center is devoted to thought leadership. This includes our economic articles and the recently released COVID-19 white paper.
Thank you, Donna. That ends our AIS virtual program. And again, a reminder to our registered member companies to call back into our annual meeting at 4 p.m. Eastern Time using the call-in information provided to you in your calendar invitation. We hope to see many of you in person in Orlando next year for AIS 2021. Thank you, and everyone, please stay healthy and safe.